Today I'll be showcasing how to scale rolling magma mines into a triple risk T17 farmer. This build is based on Garatha's original League Star concept, but adapted more for softcore trade league and taken beyond this initial concept to be more appropriate for the current meta farming strategies. Note that this is not to be taken as a build guide, more so as a reference demonstrating methods you can use to scale your own build. The reason being, it is unlikely you'll match my exact configuration of items, and it can be tricky to balance reservation, mana recovery, and getting enough fire resistance for enmity to work properly. Please use this as a reference, not as instructions. I've been using this build since the start of 3.26 and been farming T17s for the past 3 weeks, gradually evolving towards the more popular T17 Abyss strat with triple risk scarabs. This build can do all mods, though there are some that are definitely more annoying than others. And there are some where the combinations are worse than the sum of their parts. Searing exact runes and saw blades, for example. Or reduced resistances and penetration. Goes without saying. I would say that this isn't the strongest build for this strategy. The lack of leech or any proper recovery with mines does limit survivability, so there will be deaths now and again. But this is more than enough for the content, and if you're like me, someone who tends not to play too many builds in one season and just focus on optimizing one, then I'll provide a list of sort of methods in which you can use to scale your own build. So first, let's talk about the actual choice of Ascendancy. You might have noticed I switched from being a Saboteur over to a Trickster. The reason being, one step ahead is just OP. And you know, I can use the Forbidden Flame and Flesh combo to get one step ahead, but I really like Swift Killer. The main reason for this being is it just gives you a lot of extra damage, a lot of extra mind throwing speed. When you play this character, having very high mind throwing speed is very good for quality of life. It just feels 100 times better so that you can keep stutter stepping and clear through the map as fast as possible. If your mind throwing time is higher than this, 0.31 seconds, it feels very clunky to play. Mainly because we're using the, what's it, Minefield? Yeah, Minefield. Minefield just has this very sort of inbuilt delay into everything because you throw 5 mines at once, so it doesn't feel very nice. So I was in a position where I really wanted to have one step ahead, but I just could not get rid of Swift Killer. So I thought, why not just play a Trickster? It also has the benefit of giving me a bit of extra pool with Escape Artist, and of course Polymath's nice for a bit of extra damage, because why not? I'll just use my Forbidden Jewels to get this because it does the most damage. That's pretty much all there is to it. Drop Shrapnel Specialist just purely because I've got a Nimbus, so I'm making up for it. Whether you want to go Saboteur or Trickster is entirely up to you. If you do go Saboteur, whether you choose Swift Killer or one step ahead for the Forbidden Jewels is entirely up to you. For a very long time, for the first 3 weeks of the climb, I was using Swift Killer just because, like I said, I do prefer this most of the time. But there are some mods which are so incredibly annoying if you don't have one step ahead. Just think about it. All the petrification statues, the T17 mod which reduces your action speed by 3% for every action you take, all the slows that all the bosses do, etc, the drowning orbs, there's so many things which can just inconvenience you. If you have one step ahead, you become immune to all those immediately. Alternatively, you can take one step ahead, drop Swift Killer, but I would find some way to keep the mind throwing speed at 0.31 seconds or lower for this build, in my opinion. The higher the better, but then you do have some mana cost concerns. Now for the rest of the tree, fairly ordinary compared to Garatha's build, I would say. I'm running a double cluster setup, very similar jewels to what he's running. You know, I am using jewels which give max fire res, and the main reason being one of the crucial, let's say, key points of this build would be the Rakiata's Lethal Pride, which I'm using in combination with a Mage Blood and a Ruby Flask, just so I have very high fire resistance and I can mitigate some of the cold and lightning damage, and penetration for that matter, into fire damage. It's just very good for general survivability, and this Rakiata also gives fire resistance to each one of these things. Why do we want so much fire resistance? And that's because we're using this very interesting new item, Enmity's Embrace. This is quite a precarious item, and I can't really say I recommend it if you don't have a Mage Blood. It's very precarious. I've ran various different versions of this build where I've had very high pen, very medium pen, trying to balance the fire resistance as much as possible. And I find that my current level, my current damage value is enough to clear the content while still giving me enough, let's say, quality of life in other regards. I've also gone for a Storm Shroud just because it's a very effective duel and because I'm not running this here. You know, if I was playing a Saboteur, I could run this and then just... I don't care too much about the chill or the freeze because I have one step ahead, so that's not so much of an issue. Watcher's Eye with the mana cost reduction because it's very, very difficult to keep your mana cost low on this build if you're using unique rings. And of course, I'm using 2. So I need to use this. It's absolutely essential to use the Watcher's Eye, which gives me clarity, which gives me mana cost reduction in combination with clarity. And of course, the fire damage is always useful too. Rune Grafted the Bellows here for a bit of extra defense. Very nice, not much to say. Mind throwing speed. Now this is a little bit of an exception, so specifically because I'm running Abyss, I need to use the Caster Mastery. If you're not, then you don't need to use this. In fact, you can probably do away with this AoE depending on what type of content you're running. In my opinion, you should always tailor a build a little bit towards the content you're running. The majority of T17 maps are pretty shit, as I'm sure we all agree. So you probably don't need a large amount of AoE. If you're running 16s or 16.5s, then yeah, you can keep this AoE node here. But if you're not, then it's entirely up to you. I run Pain Achievement because I have Petrified Blood. And here's just a bit of Reflect Immunity, which I also have in the Pantheon. Let's go to the skills very quickly. Not too much to say here that's different from Garatha's setup. Automation with Steel Skin, which obviously I've got turned off because it's inappropriate. Standard Arcanist brand setup. Rolling Magma here. We got Awakened GMP. You do not need, by the way. Greater Volley is almost as good. Probably 90% or more as good as this. The difference between them is almost not noticeable whatsoever. It's just one extra projectile, basically, so it might not even actually affect your damage. It just affects your clear a little bit. Clarity and Vitality on Arrogance, I think, are quite essential. I really like Vitality in this build because I'm running Petrified Blood. It's just good to have a good bit of life regen. It really helps with the damage over time, which is actually one of the main killers for this build, is the fact that because we have no Leech, and because Leech is very, very difficult to get with a miner, then we just have to find it in other ways. One of the best ones is by life regen. I've got about 700 at the minute, 800, which isn't really great, but it's fine for what I'm doing in combination with a life potion. Righteous Fire I would only enable for bosses. Just a bit of a damage boost. Well, a very significant damage boost, actually. But you don't want to use this for mapping because it just wrecks your energy shield. Auras, like I mentioned, I really like Petrified Blood. I'm not using Arctic Armor only because in tier 17s you can't really start moving very often. I mean, you can, but the damage mitigation that you'd achieve by standing still in a T17 would be lost when you can just move, if you see what I mean. You mitigate damage by moving, you mitigate it by staying still with Arctic Armor, however then you're also vulnerable to more damage over time effects, the Searing Exarch runes, which you can't see, the Volatile Cores, which everybody loves, near and dear to their heart. So I personally removed it, went for Petrified Blood, got an Enlighten just to help with the mana costs and save a few points on the tree. It also means we can use Pain Achievement, which is 9.5 million DPS, right? Very efficient use of things. Now, Frostbank of Wintry Blast is my only movement skill in this current configuration, and the entire reason is for Caster Mastery. Mines do not trigger Caster Mastery, however this will, which is why I've got it linked up to Spell Echo, Arcane Surge, and Faster Casting. If anybody didn't know, if you have a movement skill linked to Spell Echo, and you're inputting a movement command at the same time, like walking, the Frostbank or Wintry Blast will only actually trigger once. It doesn't do a double proc. Now, if you don't move, it will. So you actually get the 50% more cast speed effectively for free. This here is just my Merc stuff. I'll talk very briefly about the items. Again, because I'm a trickster, I had to make some compromises with things. You can work this out in your own time. Just to highlight a few of the key things here. Defiance of Destiny, I really like. Really, really like. The main reason being there's an absolutely brutal mod in tier 17s, which is the one that removes your mana, life, and energy shield on hit. You can't mitigate this really in any way. It's a complete bullshit mod, but because it exists, we unfortunately have to build around it. So if I replace the amulet with something like a replica dragonfly, or I go for anything to do with damage, or I originally had a badge of the Brotherhood, a replica badge of the Brotherhood, so I could have something like 8 or 9 endurance charges, I think it was. That was very good until I ran into the removing life mod. That is the ultimate killer. The only thing that can stop that is recovery, and the best way of sort of band-aiding recovery onto this build is to use Defiance of Destiny. It does look a bit weird with an energy shield build, I must admit, because you only get 50% effectively of your pool actually being regenerated. But it's much, much better than not running it in my experience. I would rather have 3 endurance charges and this than 8 and no recovery. Big issue with mines, guys. We can't recover things, and that mod is absolutely brutal. Running a Mage Blood because I just want to use the Ruby Flask and a few of these other things. Don't need to talk about that. Eminent Embrace we already covered. I would only use one of these if you can get a 66 or a 65% reduced fire resistance, because this is multiplicative to your total fire res. You really have to build around this item, and I would not recommend it without a Mage Blood. If you don't have a Mage Blood, use a Taming or whatever. Nemesis I'm only using because I don't want to use Forbidden Jewels to get this thing, because it costs like 300 divines and it's just not worth it. It really isn't. Not for this build. If I'd gone to spend so much currency on a one build, I would just use something else. I'll very briefly talk about the configuration here to highlight how some of my stats have been configured. I've included Merc buffs in here because, guys, this is the Mercenary League, we need to factor these things in. I've got a Calm's Binding, which gives a 25% of physical taken as fire. I've also got, just to go into the Merc,
Another step and
on the Merc I've got a Crown of the Tyrant, which gives a good bit of pen and a good bit of flat damage. Cloak of Flame just for survivability. Shaper's Seed I really, really like. I originally had a Zoph's Blood, or a Zoph's Heart, whatever it's called, the one that gives you ash. But I find this is just much better because your mana regen can be heavily damaged by things like the mana removal on hit mod or temporal chains or other similar effects like this. There can be situations where your mana goes down, so I think this is quite useful. Calm's Binding, I give him a dodge restamming for the extra curse, and then he's got curse with flammability on hit. So the Merc is always applying flammability. I apply Sniper's Mark, I get 2 curses pretty much at all times. And I get Culling Strike from the gloves here. This Merc is not particularly special, he just has anger. That's the main reason I'm using him. And just to finish off here, I'm going to talk a little bit about the mods. I'll probably provide a regex within the description of the video. Although, to be honest, you can run all of these mods, but some of them are a bit more annoying than others. For example, I would probably avoid this, mainly because for those that don't know, the way Risk Scarabs work is if a mod gets added by a Risk Scarab, it doesn't get scaled by a map effect modifier. That only applies to mods that you've actually rolled on the map before you put it into the map device. So if you have this on the map device, it will get scaled to minus 36, 38, whatever it is. This isn't so bad if you roll it on its own, or if you roll it using the Risk Scarabs, but I would avoid this if possible, because if you get this with the combination of pen, it's just going to make your time quite a bit more difficult. Let's see, monster damage, nothing too dangerous here. This one's annoying, but it's not a problem. Annoying for damage, but again, not a problem. This is annoying if you don't have a Mage Blood. Another reason, by the way, why I don't recommend Arctic Armor, because you need to be moving all the time, and then Arctic Armor loses pretty much all of its value. People don't like Drowning Orbs, but you know, when you're a trickster, it doesn't matter. Same with this. Runes of the Searing Exarch, I would try and avoid if possible. Again, it's not so bad by itself, but if you have this in combination with other floor effects, it just becomes a complete mess. Again, you can run this, it's just a bit annoying. Yeah, you'll be mapping and you'll just reach a point where you see your life just sticks at a single value, and because the visual clarity in T17 is so terrible, you really can't see what's going on. This one's fine, actually. Monster damage, although I would avoid this when you run it in combination with max res. Again, you can run it, but I just wouldn't recommend it. I'd probably avoid this one too as well. And Saw Blades is just very, very annoying, but you can run it. The main reason being you don't have good recovery on the Mines build, as I've mentioned many times. And this can be hard to see, very hard to see. Less defenses is not really too much of an issue, but it's less energy shield. So best to avoid if you can, but no big deal. And just to finish off, sorry, I'll quickly talk about the Pantheon. You have a bit of flexibility here, it's really up to you, although I would recommend having the Reduced Reflect. There isn't really very many sources of Reflect in this game, in my build. The only thing is the Frostbank or Wintry Blast. Now, because I have anger, again I need anger, it's given a flat fire amount to the Frostbank. It's a relatively small amount overall, but I do find every now and again, like if you frost blink into a big pack, you'll take a hit of damage that you just don't need to take. So I know it feels kind of lame running Reduce Reflect on a miner's build, but I would do it. It's worth it. It's better than a lot of these other things, trust me. In terms of how much it's going to inconvenience you, this is much worse. And yeah, I just run Soul de Lunaris, which I haven't even finished, but it's good enough for what it does. And that is pretty much that. If you like, I can put a bit more of a budget version inside of the description. Please let me know if you'd like me to do that. I think you can probably work it out on your own, but for reference, the budget version would be you drop Enmity, you go back to Saboteur, you take off the Mage Blood, and you go for an Archon's Tools. A very, very good item, by the way, but I think the bigger issue with T17 farming, especially once you get towards Risk, is it's much more about your defenses. Me doing like 40 million, maybe 50 million or so with Righteous Fire is enough. It's more than enough for what I'm doing. It'd be significantly worse to do triple damage and then just die 4 times a map. It's just annoying, right? You feel like you can't actually play the game. With this build, I can play the game. I do die occasionally, of course, as you can see by my experience, but I can do the content. I farmed up more than a mirror's worth of currency, and it works. So now I'm going to go and play HCSSF. So you guys have a good day. Thank you very much.